This short video is a breakdown of all the terminology, at least I hope all, I think it will be all, that I'll be using around keys in this class. So make a note of this somewhere in your brain that, if you hit somewhere during the course, because we're going to talk about them, for the foreseeable future, that if you get confused about any of the terminology you do with key, come back here and hopefully this will help you sort it out. Because there is a lot of different ways to refer to this idea of a key. Most of all those terms have different meanings. It's not, there are times that there is some overlap. So for example, a candidate key and a key is essentially the same thing. Our book doesn't really use candidate key, it just refers to key, but you will see candidate key thrown around out there in the rest of the world, but it's not something that we see necessarily in the book. And there is some kind of modifications in terminology, depending on who you talk to, and I'll try to point out the most important versions of that, but by and large we're going to hit on all the major pieces here. So a key, we'll start there. Just the term key is that set of attributes that will uniquely define a tuple, right? And I think more formally we said in a slide just earlier this week, we said a set of attributes such that no pair of tuples can have the same value, right? So these, whatever attributes they are, could be one attribute, could be multiple attributes, they cannot have the same values, because if they do, then you have tuples that have the same values, right? We'll learn more coming up about functional dependencies and how to have kind of, attributes that depend on the key, but basically attributes that depend on the key require that key to be unique, right? So if the key is unique, you have a unique tuple, everything is good. Remember, the tuple is your row. A composite key just means that, that key might be more than one attribute. Well, it is more than one if it's a composite key, as opposed to just being one attribute, which is not a composite key, right? It's just made of that one attribute. Primary keys, now that's a term that you hear a lot. A primary key is basically just the fact that you could have multiple keys in a relation. It is possible for there to be more than one attribute or combinations of attributes that comprise a key. So for example, if you think of just like an average user table, right? Very commonly nowadays, a user table will have a user ID, and that is the primary key. It's a key. It's meant to be an auto-incrementing integer number, that just keeps going up or along or whatever the data type is. But it's just a number, and it keeps going up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, millions, billions, whatever, as long as your data type allows for those large numbers. But you could have also had, say, a social security number in there, right? The social security number as a separate attribute could also be a key. There's supposed to be no two people, at least United States citizens, on the face of the earth with the same, social security number. So both social security and user ID are keys. The primary key is the one that we have chosen, and it's particularly important to the database management system because that's what the software is using to, automatically index that relation so that you can find things quickly and relate other tables and things like that. So the primary key is just a little bit of extra terminology to say this is the one key that is the most important to us in this table. What else do we have? A natural key is we can actually go right back to that last example. A natural key just says that the key is basically an attribute that you did not make up. It's an attribute you would have had anyway. So going right back to our example with the user table, you could say that the social security number, assuming that you had a purpose for that other than just being a key, which would be normal, you would say that the social security number is a natural key. I am using that attribute purely for data, and it just so happens to be a key as well. The user ID, unless it's like an actual ID that is used as a data point somewhere else, if it's made up solely for the purpose of being a key, It is not a natural key, it is a surrogate key. So that is the difference there. If you hear that terminology is actually a lot less prevalent. You're going to hear natural key and surrogate key a lot less than you hear most of these others, but you will hear them out. They're occasionally, and I want to make sure you know what they are, because I don't want it to throw you off and think it's talking about some other type of key. A super key, we didn't do that one. A super key is simply a key, but it is not a minimal key. So it basically means that, like, if you look at the movie example that's constantly in the book, right? The primary key and the minimal key is the title and year. And that does include, there's some later examples that have like star name and stuff. Just ignore that. But the one without star name. So a super key could have been all of the attributes in that table, because they're all still going to be unique. In fact, any set of attributes that has a key for a subset is going to be a super key, right? So it just means that you can still identify every row or every tuple uniquely. It's just not necessarily the minimal way to do it. So that's what a super key is. A candidate key is just a little terminology. Again, I might have mentioned this at the beginning. That is not really found in the book, but it's just found elsewhere, and it's become more common in the years since the book was published. A candidate key is basically just a minimal key that could be used for a primary key. It's the same thing as a key. So what the book says is a key. If you hear the word candidate key, that's also the same thing. It's a key. It's minimal. It's just maybe the primary key, maybe not, right? Going back to that user ID versus social security number example that I gave before. A foreign key, I think this is our last one. A foreign key is something that we're going to get to in a couple weeks as far as using it. A foreign key is an attribute in your relation that refers to a primary key in another relation. Now, if you've never experienced this in a database before, you might be scratching your head on that. But it will make more sense once we get into the relational model and we start talking about decomposition. This is going to be very important at that point, because once we start saying, okay, we have this relation, and I don't want to get like too deep into this right now, but I want to give enough that the foreign key makes sense. I have a relation, it's a user relation, and I had some course information in there. And when I learned about decomposition, I realized that, okay, just because the user took the courses doesn't mean that the course should be attributes should be in that relation. They should really be in their own relation. So you break them out. You have a user relation and a course relation. But now I need a way to tie the two together so that I know what courses a user has taken, or conversely, what users have taken a course, whatever it is. I might have said the same thing twice. It's late. That is why you need a foreign key to tie that together. Depends on whether it's a one-to-many relation or many-many relation. We'll get into all that later. But a foreign key, again, is just an attribute that matches a primary key in another relation.